Hey y'all, how's it going? Okay, today I'm working on getting a metal drum sound, like heavy metal, like clicky and bright and fun. I had a friend over this week. His name is Matt Musty. He's a great drummer here in LA, and he had a few tracks to do in this vein, and then I actually had a commercial to do that was in very similar vein, so it was very convenient to dial up the sound. So I wanted to show you guys how I'm trying to get the sound. And one of my favorite records, which I think I've put as a post, but one of my favorite metal records is Pantera's Vulgar Display of Power. And I remember hearing this record in the early 90s and just being like shocked at the sound of it. And this was like way before I was kind of thinking about like sonic things like this. But that if you check out that record in particular, it's really heavy, and the drums are like incredibly bright and ticky. But then if you're on the right stereo, it has a crazy sub low end, and it's really weird. The drums are almost like thin sounding and super bright. I love it. It just sounds crazy. So I'm going for a little bit of that. This is not quite the right kind of track. You need, to go for that particular thing, you kind of need the guitars to sound similarly equal and taking up the right space. So with the music in here, I'm dealing with a kind of two-track. It's an instrumental guitar shredder thing. But Matt did some double kick with a double pedal on here, and so yeah, let's dive in and I'll show you what I did. All right, first things first. Let's get the source tone right. So let's get our drums as kind of clickety bright as we can. So I turn these DW beaters around to the plastic side, right? Because then we're just fighting ourselves if we are using the felt side. So let's get it. Let's help ourselves out. Help the engineer out. Plastic or wood beaters are awesome too. I love wood beaters, but I don't actually. Well, I do own two of them, but they're not on this pedal. So plastic, ugly sound. Yeah. Next, get yourself some bright cymbals. Right, heavy bright cymbals. All right, these are kind of a new thing. I was using them live just for a second here. They're these Exist. These are 15-inch power hats. They're super bright. I have two 20-inch crashes, and a ride, which is like pingy dingy. No ride in this track, but these are nice and bright and crazy. All right, get your source sound. So we just used my Ludwig drums, my 1965 Ludwig drums, which seems odd, but I figure I was carving so much out of this EQ-wise that these drums, they sound full already, and it's cool for what it is. If I were to do this again, I would actually try to go back and change a few things, but again, part of what we talk about here is kind of dealing with the gear that you have and trying to get a sound. So I was using my Beyerdynamic M160s, the ribbon mics, as overheads. Probably not the best overheads to use for this, because I would want something that's less dark than a ribbon, and something that's going to pick up less sound, like a more narrow frequency, and also something much more directional, that's just really getting the cymbals to kind of to be focused on those, as opposed to something that has a little wider range like the M160s do. So I would change that. I don't really have that option though, because I don't have two matching mics for that besides my M160s. So that's what we're dealing with. All the mics I used were my standard drum mics, but I did change out my inside kick mic to this Beyerdynamic TG D71C, which is basically like a PZM mic. And this mic is perfect for getting this ticky, clicky thing. I don't like it for really much else, but for this thing, it is totally the right mic, and it's super helpful to dial in this sound. So why don't I give you a little bit of this full drum sound, and then we'll dive in on these specific mics here. Okay, so let's start on this inside kick, and I'm going to show you what I did. Let's just solo this real quick. On its own, it's pretty awful, right? Ticky, clicky, but there's an attack and it's short. So let's talk about some key things here. So let me turn off the EQs and the gates so you can just hear it on its own with none of that. Okay, so on its own, it's a pretty thin sound, which is great. It's exactly what I want. What I did was I really wanted to separate the FET, which is on the outside, which is I'm only going to use for the low end. I really wanted to separate, so I wanted this inside kick to be only this ticky sound and containing no low end. So I EQ'd it here. Actually turned up some almost 8K here. I boosted it here. That seems a little ridiculous. The 6K, probably don't need both of those. I really was cutting out a lot of this mid-range here, 300 hertz, dipping that a lot with a really wide Q here. And then I'm also filtering all the way up to like 130 or so. So here it is. I'll turn that EQ on. So here it is flat, and then I'll turn that EQ on. Okay, I'm actually going to do one more thing here. I'm actually going to try to filter out some of that cymbal that you hear. So at 10K, I'm going to turn on this bell mode here and... Alright, I'm not sure it's doing much, but any of that I can get out I want to without losing the ticky high-end part of it. Next, I'm going to compress this here, and I'm going to, what I want is to try to get these as even as possible. A lot of times in this music, they'll use samples. They'll sample everything, so you get not only the separation of sound, but it's super even because the articulation has to be there. I'm not going to go to that route. I just want to try to do it naturally here. So I'm going to compress this pretty heavily. I'm hitting the input really hard, so it's coming in hard, not taking any of the tack off. And then I'm releasing this as fast as possible, so I'm not hanging on to any other bleed coming in to that mic. Okay, so it's at a 4:1 ratio here. So here it is off first. Okay, so obviously it's louder because the output is coming out louder, but it's we're hitting it hard and trying to make it help out the sound by making it more even with a compression here. Okay, and last we're going to gate it because you can hear that cymbal bleed. Any of that I'm trying to get rid of, so we're only hearing the attack. All right, so I'll start without it, and then I'll turn the gate on. Okay, you still hear a little bit of that cymbal, but you can tell once you get other mics in there, that's a very defined sound and pretty ugly. Okay, let's go with the kick out right now. Again, I may have wanted to use my sub on this to really just try to get this low thing, but I had the Fed up there. It was a bit of a time crunch. We're trying to get these 2 songs done in a small amount of time, which was all that we had to do. So here's the outside kick on its own. Okay, again, could maybe have built a tunnel for it. In fact, that gives me an idea of another lesson, tunneling the kick drum. So there it is on its own, and let's hear it with the EQ here. Okay, so you can hear that big difference. I'm taking all this high end off here at 7K. I can actually bring that low more. Again, and then again, I'm scooping any of this mid-range out because I don't want that, and I'm boosting at 48 hertz here. I'm trying to get this kind of subby thing happening. Okay. Okay. Next, gonna add a compressor. So if you're listening to this and you have a sub, you should hear that defined thing. If you don't have a sub, probably sounds a little more like a normal kick drum, but the subby part is coming out. Okay, so I'll add the gate now. Okay, so we're getting the articulation there. So we're getting the low tone, and then we want it off, because especially when we get to these double kick parts, you know, we just want the low thing happening, but we don't want boo, like a long noise. So we're trying to get some separation in there. In fact, let's go listen to. All right, so let's listen to the 2 kick drum mics in this double kick part. Actually, we'll listen to it in this kind of normal beat, and then we'll listen to the double kick part. Okay, here's the double kick. Okay, so you can hear it's in there. I keep adjusting things because I keep hearing things. It's really fine. I may, if I was sending this out to somebody, it's already gone out, and I didn't have to mix it like this. So I'm doing this for this purpose. If I was going to send this to somebody, I'd probably spend a little more time on this and try to get it right where the compression is going out harder, but then it's gating harder. So it's a tricky thing of trying to send it through the gate, get the volume and the consistency, but then gate it also, because the harder you bring things through the compressor, sound through the compressor, the more stuff you have to get out of it to keep the tone the same. Okay, let's go to snare. Again, just trying to go for some attack and articulation, and not necessarily the most beautiful snare sound. Okay, so real short, ticky, articulate. Here it is, flat. All right, you can hear it's just pretty normal snare tone. It's kind of dry, but you're hearing that cymbal bleed in there. So with the EQ on, trying to get a lot of the cymbal bleed out of the top end. It's like basically at 10K, and I'm just bringing this down as much as I can to try to. I'll give you an example. Here we go, to pull the cymbal bleed out. All right, so we're trying not to lose the high end and the attack of the snare, but you can hear how that dulls that cymbal range up there that we don't want. Boosting this kind of high stuff here, 4K. Trying to keep this Q quite defined. Again, taking out a lot of this low mid stuff. All right, compress it. We're going to send it through here pretty hard. Again, we want it even. Okay, so we're getting a lot more cymbal bleed. It's compressing, so it's grabbing all that sound and shoveling it through there. So you hear that, but we don't want it to sound too unnatural, but we kind of do. And then, okay, I'll turn the gate on. Okay, so I moved that a little so we're not getting. You could hear the kicks were setting off. They were making it through the gate, so I changed that. Bottom snare. Okay, similar concept as the top snare. Trying to get that cymbal bleed out of there. So here's just the kick and snare. All right, pretty rude, right? Metal music's supposed to be rude. There we go. Toms. All right, so this is pretty interesting to me. So let me give you a little. You can see down here that I've cut a lot of this potential bleed out of the toms here. That's because there's so much cymbal stuff and extra sound coming through that it was messing with the whole thing. So let me give you some idea of what was happening and what I was trying to fight it. So down here in the toms, this is all the bleed. This is the full kit sound. So you'll hear, and this is with the gates and everything. Okay, Okay, so that's not good. That's messing with our whole sound. So when we cut out the transients in here and all this bleed, this is what starts to happen. Okay, so it's much more defined. It allows us to EQ these toms much harsher. It's taken away the cymbal bleed. And what I was doing, and I didn't do every single one of these because you would do this if you were mixing, but try to get all the way up right to the transient right there. So we get no cymbal bleed to right before that. Okay, let me give you an example here. So here's no cymbal bleed before the toms. Right, and then what we want to do is put a little fade there, a little fade there. All right, so it comes in quickly and it fades out naturally. It sounds a little bit more like a tom. So let me give you an example of if we don't cut it right to the transient, what happens? I'll do it on both these here so you can hear. You'll hear the cymbal bleed come through. So, and that starts to happen every time you hear a tom, which gets super annoying, throws your mix off, and it sounds awful. So you got to cut those right to every single one. Again, on the toms, trying to get a lot of attack. I EQ'd these with hardware coming in, so I'm enhancing it a bit more with plugins, but I did a similar curve coming in here where I'm boosting, what do we got here, 3K, get some attack, taking some of this high end off, again the cymbal bleed, trying to get rid of this 10K up here, scooping a lot out of the middle because I don't want this mid-range in these. I just want it to be like I want to hear the top and the bottom, you know, the low and the high. Okay, the more mid-rangey, especially because they're Ludwigs, right? It like any of that Americana feel, really natural drum sound feel. I'm trying to eradicate all that. I'm compressing the heck out of these things again, so the hits are more even, and then I'm gating. So when we turn the gates off, even when they're cut the way they are, check it out. No gates. With the gate. Ooh, interesting. I think I have to set this better. Let me give you some full track. Oh, here we go. Overheads. So the overheads, as you can see, are at -18. Let me give you full drums. And the rooms are muted the whole time. I didn't want any room in this. I wanted it super dry. Again, articulate. Any of this room ambience, not good. So the rooms are muted the whole time. Might as well just do this. Just do this. Mute. Bye-bye. Okay, so here are drums with no overheads, and then I'm going to give you an idea of what it's like and where we have to set the overheads to get this to where the cymbal level is kind of acceptable, and then I'll give you a little EQ of what I'm trying to do. Kind of comical sounding, right? Now we bring in the overheads, and now we're actually going to get, you know, a little more of a natural drum sound because we're going to hear some length on some things. And I'm just going to fade this overhead in slowly, and we'll see where it sounds good. Okay, so you can see as you bring it in, it starts to give some length to the rest of the drums. It starts to sound a little more natural, and it doesn't sound like we've programmed a drum machine, but it sounds like a drummer. Okay. So let's do that with the guitar track in, okay? And I'm gonna do the exact same thing, okay? Right? Okay, all of a sudden it sounds like drums. So we've done all this crazy processing and having the kick and snare have a lot of attack, the toms have attack, scooping the EQ out so we just get the lows and the highs. And then the overheads, I'm really just trying to go for the high end here. Here's the overheads, just naturally. Okay, and here's the EQ curve. I actually brought this filter up even more, almost to 200 hertz, because I'm just trying to get the kick drum, any toms out of there, because I only want those really speaking from the kind of directional mics. All right, and then a little bit of compression. And that's just that compression is just to help flatten the transients a little bit, just so it's not, it's peaking a little less. Okay, and on the bus, I still have my usual tape thing that I throw on there that just kind of makes everything a little more beefy. And then I usually use this drum bus polish, which is a slate thing, and it seems to work quite well through the bus. And here, let's just check out this double kick section again one more time. Now that you guys, I've shown you guys how I defined all this. We lost the snare. Okay, so that's what I mean. This is super tricky. I'm gonna put the output on the compressor out. Okay, so what I would probably actually do, if I was going to send this off to somebody and I wanted it perfect, I would actually probably go into the snare track here and cut everything out in between these, which means I would go in here, the snares grouped, and literally cut all this out. Like right up to the transient, and then we'd only be getting the attack. We'd have even less bleed. It would sound like more samples. And then I think with those overheads, things would start to gel. So that's kind of my take on metal drums. I do this sometimes. I think it's super fun. I mean, I love these sounds. They're so weird and like, I'm not a metal drummer and I'm not a connoisseur. But there's certain things I really love, and this is, metal drums like this are like a kind of a fun thing, I think. But hopefully that gives you some insight into how to get some of these sounds. Again, miking could be, getting things close as far as directional mics, still getting a tone out of it, or as much tone as you want out of it. Just try to cut down on bleed, making things dry, not necessarily roomy, if you're going for this, and gating things, compressing and gating things heavily. So it almost sounds like samples. Yeah, so that's my take on the metal drum thing right now, and that's it. Okay, questions? Hit me up. See ya.